She was found burned. It was horrible.
I thought he was going to say I didn't mean to kill her.
She waved at us, then she left, and we never saw her again.
There's no explanation. The investigation was botched.
He thought I was taking him to the judge or to jail.
On September 12, 1994, in Guilvinec in Finistère, a body is discovered in the trunk of a burned-out car.
We simply see charred pieces of bone.
The victim's name is Marie-Michèle Calvez.
Did she realize? Was she scared? Was she in pain? Who did she think about?
Who could have a grudge against this 40-year-old woman?
I think the murderer was someone close to Marie-Michèle.
In this case, the police will explore many leads.
This kind of modus operandi, setting fire to a car to make a body disappear, in criminology, is mainly seen with men.
Soon, the investigators suspect the victim's partner.
It's weird. He was her boyfriend. They were a couple with plans for the future, and this man wasn't worried.
Her relationship with him apparently wasn't easy. Of course, I wondered about her partner.
What if Marie-Michèle Calvez was killed by one of her competitors?
She had a very important job, and she was a single, independent woman. So I think that must have aroused jealousy.
What if the victim's best friend was involved in the murder?
We find out he isn't a gentle guy, and he was violent towards his wife.
He's floundering. He doesn't confess to the murder in so many words, but he makes statements to the police that make him a prime suspect.
Jean-Marc Bloch, former head of the Versailles Police Department, and Negar Haidi, criminal lawyer, will join us as we look back on this unsolved case. Thursday, September 22nd, 1994. It's 3 a.m. in the port of Guilvinec in Brittany. Fishing boats are heading out to sea. But that night, one crew is forced to stay on the dock.
These 3 sailors are supposed to go out to sea, to do their job, to go fishing. But when they board, their boat breaks down. There's a mechanical breakdown, quite simply. So as a result, they don't go out to sea, and they go home.
The fishermen leave the port of Guilvinec and head towards Panmarche, about 6 miles west.
Flames grab their attention. And as they get closer, they see a car on fire.
This burning car is on the site of an old factory.
It was the place where an old factory stood. It deserved its name, since in Breton we called it the Core Factory, which means, pardon my language, the shit factory. It smelled very bad, since fish were processed there.
Fearing the vehicle could explode, the sailors decide not to approach, and they immediately alert the local authorities. At 3:40 a.m., officers from the Guilvinec Criminal Investigation Unit arrive on the scene, shortly after the fire department.
The blaze is very strong and very fierce. They can't get close.
Once the fire has been put out, the police walk around the vehicle, which has been destroyed by the flames.
This is when they discover that at the back of the vehicle, in the trunk, there's a charred body.
A burned-out car, a charred body found in the trunk. For the police, this is surely the start of a homicide case. Then, a car speeds onto the scene.
A Renault 18 station wagon comes from the top of Penmarch.
The car approaches the police at full speed, then does a sudden U-turn. The investigators have just enough time to notice the vehicle's registration. Everyone then wonders the same thing. Is this car connected to the crime that has just been discovered? Given the gravity of the situation, the Guilvinec police cordon off the scene while waiting for detectives from the Rennes investigation unit to arrive. The public prosecutor of Camper is informed of the discovery of the body. As the death shows clear signs of foul play, he immediately goes to the scene. It's 5 a.m. when the Rennes investigation unit arrives on the scene. They are accompanied by forensic identification technicians. There's an urgent need to inspect the scene of the discovery.
The timer starts, the clock is ticking, and here the evidence and clues have been fragmented and damaged. The crime scene has been altered, so that's a pain.
Before examining the body, the investigations focus on the car. The doors are closed. The window on the driver's side is slightly open. No ignition key is visible. The vehicle is very damaged.
The car is white. It's more than just burned. It's white. It's burned to a cinder.
In the vehicle, something immediately catches Thierry Lezeau's attention. The remains of burned fabric piled on top of each other.
They were pretty large piles. We can assume that there were many more to start with, which could have been burned. Yes, there was a large quantity.
These textile residues are immediately placed in evidence bags. They're sent to the laboratory for analysis.
We were able to prove that gasoline had been used because traces of gasoline were found in the fabric.
The position of this pile of fabric soaked in fuel was not chosen at random.
It's significant since it was placed on the part of the seat above the gas tank.
Whoever started the fire knew exactly what they were doing. Among the fabric, pieces of wood are also discovered. At first glance, wheel chocks. According to Gerard Casso, a fire expert, everything was put in place so the fire would spread quickly.
It burns pretty fast, and the flames are big. It's like in a fireplace. The temperature gets so high that combustion becomes widespread.
Only the vehicle's number plate has not been completely devoured by the flames.
Then, when the investigators go very quickly through the prefecture's vehicle registration database, they find a vehicle, an address, and the name of the owner. And after, they do investigative work.
The owner of the vehicle is immediately identified. Her name is Marie-Michèle Calvez, and she lives a few miles away. Could this be the victim found in the trunk? For now, the police have no way of knowing because the body is severely damaged.
It's a heavily burned body. The teeth exploded from the heat of the fire.
We simply see charred pieces of bone, particularly limbs. The lower limbs are cut in half. There are no lower legs. There are only what are called long bones, the thickest bones. Of course, there's almost nothing left of the head.
Extracting the body is therefore a very delicate operation. 3 officers are responsible for placing it in a tarpaulin.
One takes the head, one takes the bottom of the body, and the other takes what's left of the pelvis area. They go slowly. You need to make sure there's nothing stuck underneath, and not to lose too many parts of the body. It's put delicately on a kind of tarp, then quickly into a body bag and taken to the Forensic Institute in Brest.
The forensic identification technicians then take a look at the trunk. Ashes become the focus of their inspection.
Sieving is done, which means trying to find metal objects that haven't been destroyed in the fire. You never know what could be in the ashes. Of course, we're talking about ashes, remains. It takes a long time, but it has to be done. And sometimes there are surprises.
At this crime scene, the surprise comes in the form of gold medal buttons. 6 are found. All of them have an anchor on top. No other clues are found in the ashes. The police gather their evidence. The day is dawning. The investigation begins. Jean-Marc, we're at the place where the body was discovered. The old fish factory has been demolished and the site has now become a space for walking. But you can see the layout of the site. What does this place tell us?
Well, we can see clearly that we're in a rather isolated place, a good 100 yards from the main road. And the witnesses of the time confirm this. To get here, you had to be local, probably know the factory, and maybe even have worked there.
What do you remember from the inspection of the scene where the body was found?
First, and this is important, the number plate which was still on the car and made it possible to quickly identify the owner. If the perpetrator or perpetrators didn't bother removing this plate, it was probably because they thought there wasn't enough connecting them to this car for them to be identified. And then the second important thing is, given the car's state of disrepair, the fire must have started at least an hour before the firefighters and the police arrived.
In the car, investigators found a significant quantity of fabric and wood, which could suggest that the fire was premeditated.
Yes. Between the place chosen to set this car on fire and the materials that were brought there, fabric and wood to light the fire and accelerate the combustion, suggests this wasn't done in a hurry or by accident. Everything was organized and planned, yes. This suggests premeditation.
By identifying the registration, the police discovered that the car belonged to Marie-Michèle Calvez. Can we deduce that she's the victim?
No, that deduction would be a very risky leap. But the fact that buttons from a woman's item of clothing were discovered in the car means we can't rule out that the victim is the car's owner. To confirm this, additional tests will be necessary, especially the results of the autopsy.
With the inspection of the scene completed, the police urgently followed their first lead, the car which came to the scene of the tragedy before speeding off. On the night of the tragedy, the police were unable to intercept the vehicle, but the next morning, thanks to the registration, they identified the owner. The man is immediately brought into the Guilvinec gendarmerie. The investigators want to know where he was the night of the murder. He explains that he spent the evening in a bar at the port with 5 sea fishermen. He says he left around midnight after an evening of drinking. He adds that he left his car keys with the fishermen who wanted to keep the party going.
And then they went to an open-air dance hall since they had time before their next embarkation.
The investigation finds that the 5 fishermen belong to a crew from Vendée, who set sail at 9:30 that morning. So to question the fishermen as soon as possible, there's only one solution: going on board.
The armada was launched using the maritime gendarmerie. They were picked up, if I recall correctly, off the coast of Scotland.
After this chase at sea, the 5 fishermen are taken into custody. All of them say they have nothing to do with the burned-out car. All of them admit to being highly intoxicated.
They spent the night going from one bar to another, from one club to another. They were very drunk, and in the middle of the night, they were looking for one last place to end the party.
And that's how they ended up at around 4 a.m. at the scene of the fire. They walked towards the glow of the flames, thinking it was the lights of a nightclub.
In the landscape, they saw a kind of light, which was actually the burning car.
As there were people there, firefighters and everything, they left a little scared. They had been drinking, so there was no question of staying there and getting checked. So they hit the road.
In custody, these sea fishermen claim to have ended up at the scene of the tragedy by chance.
And after verifying their schedules, and since the statements matched, it turned out that these 5 fishermen had nothing to do with it.
This lead leads to nothing. With no conclusive evidence from the scene, the police start going door to door. This is when they collect a crucial testimony from a woman living very close to the place where the body was discovered.
The house is approximately 30 to 45 yards from the scene of the fire, separated by a road.
The local woman explains that she was awake on the night of the tragedy.
This lady had some problems with insomnia. She smoked a lot and read a lot. To make up for the lack of sleep, she devoured books.
That evening, this woman closed her bedroom shutters but left her window open. At around 2:30 a.m., she heard a first vehicle go past, followed almost immediately by a second one.
She also heard two people speaking, and only one car leaving after. She was able to pick up some of the words these people said. It's okay, something like that. It's okay, we can go.
The woman is certain she heard a male voice say, "It's okay, we can go." She makes it clear she heard no female voice that night. No shouting, no arguing, just the voices of two seemingly calm and determined men. Thanks to this neighbor's testimony, the police now know that the two men are involved in the murder. Nagar, we just saw the police have collected important testimony from a neighbor who lives very close to where the car was burned. Unlike this woman, some people can be reluctant to testify in criminal cases, often out of fear. How can witnesses be encouraged to come forward?
There are mechanisms for protecting witnesses whose incriminating statements could physically endanger them or their loved ones. In general, their statements will be made anonymous, either partially by showing their name but not their address in the report, or entirely by showing neither their name nor their address. But this anonymity risks jeopardizing the right to a fair trial, since it's more difficult for the accused parties to defend themselves against witnesses whose identities they don't know. The implementation of anonymity must comply with certain conditions. There must be a real danger to the witness. The offense must be considered serious, and a magistrate must have previously authorized the implementation of anonymity.
On September 27, 1994, 5 days after the incident, a formal homicide investigation is opened. Is destroying the victim's body by burning it considered an aggravating factor?
No. An aggravating factor is a particular situation which increases the severity of an offense and justifies a harsher sentence. The legislator lists for most offenses a series of aggravating factors, which are found fairly often, for example, related to the victim's characteristics, if the victim was a minor at the time of the incident, or if they were particularly vulnerable due to old age or disability. And to return to our case, the destruction of the victim's body after the murder was committed cannot be an aggravating factor. However, it can be an offense of its own, that of destruction of evidence, which incurs a punishment of up to 3 years in prison and a $50,000 fine.
Since the discovery of the body, the Rennes Criminal Investigation Unit has overseen the investigation. Who decides which police force is called in?
There are criteria of territorial and material jurisdiction, for example, where the offense took place and what type of offense it is, and these criteria determine the appropriate police force. According to these criteria, the public prosecutor and then the examining magistrate will decide to call in this or that force, knowing that in general, the force that's initially chosen remains the same throughout the proceedings.
The police are now eagerly awaiting the results of the autopsy. Who is the victim? What's the cause of death? When did it happen? The medical examiner must now try to answer all these questions. The body discovered in the car is extremely damaged.
The body has been very degraded from the effects of heat. It is blackened, and some parts have been destroyed.
The autopsy promises to be difficult. The first step is to identify the victim.
Identification is done by linking ante-mortem documents during the person's lifetime with post-mortem documents.
For this, a panoramic dental X-ray is taken of the skull. The police have asked for a similar X-ray from the dentist of Marie-Michèle Calvez, the owner of the burned car.
The two images are compared, and there are 32 possible matches. The more matches there are, the closer we get to a formal identification.
The doctor concludes with certainty that the body found in the trunk of the car is Marie-Michèle Calvez. He then continues his examination.
When a body is altered by fire, it becomes extremely difficult to find the cause of death.
The medical examiner will now try to establish if the victim was already dead when the car was set alight.
Smoke inhalation leaves traces of soot in the bronchi and the respiratory system if the person is alive. On the contrary, if the person is already dead, there will be no traces of soot in the bronchi.
After his internal examination, the medical examiner can finally be certain.
Despite the burning, the diagnosis is clear. We are absolutely certain that this person was dead by the time the fire started around her.
The autopsy comes to an end. The medical examiner can't give the cause of death, but he can, after studying the contents of the victim's stomach, provide details.
The food bolus is found next to the body because the stomach, which is very weak, was destroyed by the fire and released this bolus.
It appears that the victim ate pasta.
There are some clearly identifiable elements, so we know the death must have occurred within an hour following the ingestion of the food.
The forensic examination has been completed. Marie-Michèle Calvez's sister is then informed of the tragedy.
Knowing she was burned, it's horrific. It's horrific. I thought, but what happened? How come she was found in the trunk of her car burned? I couldn't understand it or even accept it. It was horrible.
While the investigators are reading the autopsy report, Marie-Michèle Calvez's funeral takes place on October 3rd, 1994 in Plonier-la-Verne. The police will now go over Marie-Michèle Calvez's life with a fine-tooth comb in their character investigation. The investigation aims to find out what were the victim's personal and professional relationships, what were her habits, how did she spend her last day? Answering these questions may help determine the motive for the murder. Marie-Michèle Calvez was 40 years old. She was a lively and caring woman.
She was always in a good mood. It was always nice to see her because she always had a lot to say.
She was a very good friend. I knew I could count on her. We were very close.
All of Marie-Michèle's loved ones describe her personality as strong but sweet.
She had a strong character. If she decided on something, that was it.
In fact, that was part of Marie-Michèle's character. To be honest, she was always blunt. When she had something to say, she said it. It could go down well or badly, but when you got used to her, you knew that's how she was. There you go.
Marie-Michèle Calvez was an independent woman who lived alone, with no children, in her parents' old house in Plonier-la-Verne. For the past 4 years, she had been working as an insurance advisor for UAP, the Paris Insurance Union, an exciting job that she was passionate about.
Her job at the UAP involved cold calling, finding clients for life insurance contracts, things like that. It was cold calling, so she knocked on doors or went to bars to try to find clients.
Thanks to her strength of conviction, Marie-Michèle Calvez quickly climbed the ladder within the company.
It was a difficult job, but she liked it, and she was valued. I think she was happy.
At the time of her death, Marie-Michèle Calvez was particularly happy because for 7 months, she had been in a relationship with Michel, a family doctor.
Yes, she was satisfied because he was a good fit for her. And besides, it's nice to have a partner. When you get to 40, you start to think about that.
The couple may even have been thinking about marriage.
I got the feeling she was fulfilled. Yes, she was fulfilled. For that matter, when I told her I was getting married, she turned around and said to me, "I'd like to get married too. Maybe we'll get married in the coming months too. It's in the works."
The police call in the doctor. They hope the man the victim shared her life with will be able to help them retrace Marie-Michèle Calvez's final hours. The man tells the investigators that his partner spent the night before the murder at his house. The alarm went off as usual at 6:45 a.m.
They had breakfast together. They decided to meet up in the evening because they were planning to go to the house of a painter friend where Marie-Michèle had seen a painting. She wanted to buy the painting from him.
And at 8 a.m., Marie-Michèle Calvez left her partner, promising to be back around 8 p.m. She then went to her house, as she did every day before going to work.
On Marie's typical workday, since she was staying at her partner's house, she would go home in the morning to check her messages.
At her home, Marie-Michèle checks her answering machine and makes various phone calls to organize the day's appointments.
Back then, there were no cell phones, so she made all her work calls from home. Clients had her home number.
The police established that at noon, Marie-Michèle Calvez joined two friends at the Port Hotel restaurant, a place where she was a regular, especially to meet clients, mostly sea fishermen.
The Port Hotel restaurant was a beautiful establishment at the time, where all the professional fishers in the region went. Clearly, it was the place to be, at the port of Guilvinec.
At the Port Hotel, there were a lot of sailors. It was very important for her work. She could find extra clients. And she also had fun there, because it was somewhere a lot of people came together. There was a very good atmosphere.
She had lunch with her friends. The three of them then had a drink at the bar to continue their conversation. At around 4 p.m., Marie-Michèle Calvez visited Sophie's Salon, a florist in Lechiaga, a small town near Guilvinec.
I was working with my mother. We were each on one side of the store, and Marie-Michèle was between the two of us. She stood between the two of us, and she chatted with us normally, as she usually did. She was completely normal that day.
Marie-Michèle Calvez then told her about an appointment she had to attend later in the evening.
She told me that she had an appointment with a painter, from whom she had ordered 2 paintings. And I think I remember that one of the paintings was of blue hydrangeas, so she had to go there with her partner.
Around 5 p.m., Marie-Michèle Calvez left the flower store.
At that moment, she came out of the store, she said goodbye, she waved at us, and then she left, and we never saw her again. There you go.
She then went to see a client with whom she had an appointment at 6 p.m.
She ended her day with one last client, a sea fisherman. She had a drink at his house. He offered her a second drink, but she told him, "No, I don't have time. I'm in a hurry because I have to go to an appointment."
Her last client explains that she left his home around 7 p.m.
And then she was supposed to go to her boyfriend's, the doctor's, to go with him to the painters. She didn't show up at the doctor's. She disappeared. From 7 p.m., we lose track of her. No one knows what happened to her after.
What did Marie-Michèle Calvez do next? According to her loved ones, she used to come home to Plonnier-la-Verne every evening.
She stopped by her house every night, since she had a dog, Zigomar. She took him out in the morning and brought him inside in the evening.
Because otherwise the dog barked all night and disturbed the neighbors. So routinely, she went home every evening after work to bring the dog in, to close the shutters, and maybe to check the messages on her machine.
But for now, the investigators can't establish where Marie-Michèle Calvez went after 7 p.m. All that's certain is that she never joined her partner at 8 o'clock, as agreed in the morning. And she never went to the painter's house to get her painting. No one saw her alive again after her last meeting. But everyone who crossed paths with her that day is unanimous in saying she was fine.
That day, Marie-Michèle was talkative, as usual. She was fine. She was in good form. Everything was perfectly fine. There was nothing different from usual. She was her usual self.
At what point did Marie-Michèle Calvez's day descend into horror? When did she run into her killer? Who were the two men overheard by the neighbor next to the place where the body was found that tragic night? The investigation needs to answer these questions. Jean-Marc, thanks to many testimonies, we know almost hour by hour what Marie-Michèle Calvez did on her final day. And this is, of course, fortunate for the investigators.
Yes, her job involves scheduled appointments throughout the day. It's therefore easy to trace what she did, which is an asset for the investigators. Speaking of which, from all the testimonies, it seems that she was planning to visit her painter friend that evening to buy a painting from him. What's more, nothing noteworthy was reported happening that day.
Marie-Michèle Calvez is described by her loved ones as a happy woman, always in a good mood. But there's one point they all insist on: her strong character.
Yes, this is all important information, but what sticks in my mind is her character being described as a little blunt. Of course, this doesn't directly help to identify the perpetrator, but it may be the beginning of an explanation. There could have been a discussion that turned nasty, that got out of hand, that escalated.
Thanks to the testimony of the neighbor who lives near the place where the burning car was found, we know that there were at least 2 people on the scene and 2 cars. According to this woman, she heard no screams or cries for help, which could suggest that Marie-Michèle Calvez was not assaulted there. What's your opinion, Jean-Marc?
Yes, I think the crime took place in at least 2 stages. First, the murder in an unknown location, and then the transportation and burning of the body. So, of course, the investigators must focus on finding out where the murder took place. For a start, the place itself could provide a certain amount of information. It's not the same thing if it's the victim's home, the home of a third party, a public road, or a public place. What's more, as we well know, inspecting a crime scene can provide evidence, even something that could help identify the perpetrator.
The investigators know that Marie-Michèle Calvez came home every evening before going to her partner's home. They must now establish whether on the day of the incident the victim followed her usual schedule. The investigation is now focusing on the victim's neighborhood. The priority is to determine if Marie-Michèle Calvez returned home after her last work appointment. A canvas of the residential neighborhood where Marie-Michèle Calvez lived provides essential information.
Her car was seen in front of her house that evening at around 7 p.m.
The man who saw the car remembers the evening well because he was expecting guests. So it seems that Marie-Michèle Calvez did return home after leaving her last client.
Now, no witness recalls seeing Marie-Michèle.
No neighbor saw the victim on the night of the incident. The police then decide to search her house.
There's nothing. It's spotless. As usual, the house is tidy. Like her, she was always very well dressed.
Inside the house, there are no signs of struggle or violence. In the kitchen, the police notice 2 glasses and a plate drying on the drainer. On the gas stove, there's a jar of pasta. Catherine Calvez was present during this search.
The first time I went back to the house with the police, when I went into the kitchen, something jumped out at me. There was an open tube of toothpaste on the kitchen sideboard. It had no business being there.
This tube of toothpaste is, according to the victim's sister, an important clue.
She was almost OCD. I mean, she wasn't at all. No, the bathroom upstairs and the tube of toothpaste had no business being there. If it had been a new tube, okay, she comes back from shopping, she puts it on the sideboard, she forgets to take it upstairs, okay. But a started tube? No. What's an open tube of toothpaste doing in a kitchen? Nothing.
For Catherine Calvez, this tube of toothpaste in the kitchen proves that something abnormal happened in the house.
I imagine Marie was interrupted while in the bathroom and came down with her tube of toothpaste. And I thought to myself, this is where it might have happened. Something happened here.
Something else suggests that Marie-Michèle Calvez did go home on the night of the murder.
We know exactly what clothes the victim was wearing during her last appointment.
Everyone who saw her on her last day confirmed to the police that she was wearing a tartan pattern tailored jacket, a black skirt, and a beige raincoat. There were no gold buttons on any of her clothes, like those found on the corpse in the burned-out car. According to Catherine Calvez, the golden buttons come from a jacket that her sister liked to wear when she wasn't working.
There are many things that suggest she returned home, and in all likelihood, changed her clothes.
No evidence in the victim's house explains what happened there on the night of the murder. One thing's for sure, her dog Zigomar was not returned to the house that evening.
At any rate, the fact that the dog wasn't in the house that night means that her evening didn't go normally. Because on a normal evening, she would have brought the dog inside, even if she had stayed there to sleep, possibly, I don't know. But the dog would have been home. In any case, the dog would have been home. So that means something happened that wasn't normal.
Then the police become aware of a new testimony from another of Marie-Michèle Calvez's neighbors.
Around midnight, he was walking around the neighborhood where Marie-Michèle lived.
The man clearly remembers a car parked in front of Marie-Michèle Calvez's house. He is certain that he's never seen this vehicle in the neighborhood before.
He saw the lights on in Marie-Michèle's house. He saw this car that he describes as having stickers on the rear window. He doesn't remember the registration, but there was a 29.
This vehicle with a Finistère number plate isn't found by the police, so the investigators can't identify the individual who parked in front of the victim's house on the night of the tragedy. Jean-Marc, the investigation's first clues suggest that on the evening of the murder, Marie-Michèle Calvez returned home after her last work appointment. What stands out to you from the findings in the victim's house?
First and foremost is the pot of pasta on the stove. As we saw during the autopsy, the medical examiner found pasta in the victim's stomach, so it's difficult not to make a connection. It seems to prove that the victim had her final meal at home.
It seems a little strange that Marie-Michèle Calvez ate at home when she was supposed to meet her partner at 8 p.m., and they usually had dinner together. What do you think, Jean-Marc?
We can wonder whether she really intended to have dinner with her partner, or if she had other ideas. She might have changed her mind.
The investigators found a plate and 2 glasses on the kitchen drainer. Do you think Marie-Michèle Calvez had a guest for her last meal?
It's difficult to answer that question. It's quite possible that these 2 glasses were not used at the same time. One of them could have been on the drainer for 1 or 2 days without being put away.
The investigators found no signs of struggle in the house. For you, does this rule out the possibility that Marie-Michèle Calvez was killed in her home?
No, that doesn't rule out anything. As we have seen, the perpetrator or perpetrators were methodical and cold-blooded enough to burn the car. They could have displayed the same control by cleaning up any signs of any potential struggle inside the house.
One last thing, Jean-Marc. The testimony of the neighbor who says he saw a car parked in front of Marie-Michèle Calvez's house around midnight. Do you think it was the killer's car?
It is quite possible, but it could also be, and I'm leaning towards this theory, the car of the person who helped the killer get rid of the body.
The police will try to answer all these questions. To do this, they will start by looking into Marie-Michèle Calvez's love life. Since the beginning of the investigation, Michel, the victim's partner, has been of particular interest to the police. They decide to ask him a few questions.
Naturally, he was the person closest to Marie-Michèle at that time in her life. So he's the first person they focus on.
The police investigation reveals that Michel had a strange attitude on the night of the murder. Marie-Michèle Calvez was supposed to meet her partner at his house around 8 p.m.
She was planning to go to her boyfriend's house, since they were supposed to visit a painter to buy a painting.
So why wasn't Michel alarmed by his girlfriend's absence?
His behavior intrigues the police. He wasn't worried by the fact that she didn't turn up. He didn't pick up the phone. He didn't try to contact her.
In front of the police, Michel recalls calmly waiting for his partner while watching TV.
Knowing Marie was meticulous and punctual and she didn't arrive at 8 o'clock, I don't know, I wouldn't be worried. Well, I'd still find it a little weird. Okay, 8:15, 8:30, 8:45, 9 o'clock. Honestly, I would start to have doubts.
Tired of waiting for his girlfriend, the doctor allegedly then went to bed at 10 o'clock, without ever hearing from Marie-Michèle.
I don't understand why he wasn't worried. Why didn't he go out? It wasn't far. They didn't live far apart. In 5 minutes, he would have been there.
What's the explanation for Michel's strange behavior? As a family doctor, this man has an excellent reputation, but this doesn't stop the investigators from digging into the couple's private life.
That summer, they had been on vacation to Ireland. For me, personally, she was happy with him.
She often talked to me about her partner, and she was happy. She had a lot of plans in mind at that time. There was nothing to suggest either discontent or any kind of problem.
But Catherine Calvez brings a completely different perspective on her sister's love life. She remembers their last telephone conversation 10 days before the murder, on September 11th, 1994.
She was having doubts about her relationship with her partner. She wasn't too sure of herself anymore. She wasn't relaxed, no. There had been a heated argument as far as I remember.
The motive for the argument seemed rather trivial.
She teased him about another partner or girlfriend he had, and he didn't really like it. And it got heated, apparently. He put her in her place. Verbally, he could be very aggressive.
During this phone call, Marie-Michèle seemed worried and not at all sure of her love.
I felt she was really unsettled and she was having doubts. Yes, it had cast a chill. She saw things in black and white. It was good or it wasn't good. She didn't do things by halves.
To the police, Catherine Calvez denies her sister's wedding plans.
No, I never heard her saying she was getting married. If anyone was going to know about it, I think I would have been the first to know.
All this information fuels the police's suspicions. They decide on February 22nd, 1996, almost a year and a half after the murder, to place Marie-Michèle Calvez's partner in police custody. The interrogation takes place at the Camper police station. The investigators want to know why Michel calmly went to bed without trying to contact his partner. It's been 17 months since Marie-Michèle Calvez was killed. The police start the doctor's custody, determined to get answers.
To the question, did you see Marie-Michèle? He said no. She didn't sleep over that night. But it's weird, she was his girlfriend. They were a couple with plans for the future, and this man wasn't worried. He didn't get in the car or pick up the phone.
Michel explains that he assumed his partner had changed her mind without letting him know.
If she had arranged to meet Michel at 8 o'clock, she would have come to meet him. She would not, of her own free will, have gone somewhere else to have a drink with her friends, for example. No, she wouldn't have done that. She would have come to meet him if she could have.
Facing the investigators, the doctor reports feeling upset about his partner's change of plans. That's why, hurt, he didn't try to contact her that evening.
That's how he works. He's a loner. This behavior was usual for him. We reached this conclusion after analyzing several interviews and testimonies.
According to psychologist Helen Romano, Michel's lack of anxiety is not incriminating.
The concerned partner lives his life, waits for his girlfriend to arrive, then goes to bed because he's tired. This isn't suspicious. If all the partners of people who work late and come home late called the police, I think the police stations would be overloaded with calls. As such, I don't think it's suspicious.
The doctor's apparent lack of emotion when he learned of his partner's death also isn't suspicious for the psychologist.
Doctors regularly deal with other people's distress and suffering. They learn from their professional experience to contain their emotions. Very often, when they are confronted with the death of a loved one, they tend to have subdued reactions. They don't break down crying or screaming as someone with another profession might.
Searches take place at the doctor's home and office. The investigators want to establish if the burned fabric found in the car came from Michelle's house, but no clues are discovered. After 48 hours in custody, Michelle walks free from the police station.
In any case, that night, he didn't go out. He didn't leave his house. That couldn't be established, at least.
He was able to prove that he stayed at home. It seems he managed to prove that he did not kill Marie-Michèle. She didn't go to his house, and he wasn't the last person to see her alive. But is that a good alibi? I don't know. In any case, the alibi obviously convinced the justice system.
Michelle was never implicated in the murder of Marie-Michèle Calvez.
Today, he doesn't want to talk about the case anymore. I tried to reach him, but he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to see anyone. The silence that he has kept since the case matches the shadow that has fallen on this case. And it matches, if I may say, the local atmosphere.
Nagar, it's clear that Marie-Michèle Calvez's partner quickly became a suspect. However, the police had no material evidence to back up their suspicions. This didn't stop them from taking this man into custody. Why didn't they question him as a part of a simple interview?
Since the 2014 law, there is, besides police custody, a measure called free questioning, which allows someone to be questioned for the time strictly necessary for their statements. They are free to leave the premises once they've done so. At the time of the incident, free questioning didn't exist yet, and this gradation didn't exist yet either. And that's undoubtedly why Marie-Michèle Calvez's partner was taken straight into custody.
As we saw, this man's doctor's office was searched. Do investigators have to follow any particular rules when conducting a search at a doctor's office?
In general, the Code of Criminal Procedure provides for all professions with professional secrecy, such as notaries, bailiffs, lawyers, journalists, and doctors, special rules which regulate searches to preserve as much as possible professional secrecy. For doctors, Article 56.3 of the Code of Criminal Procedure requires that the search be carried out by a magistrate, when usually it's carried out by a judicial police officer and in the presence of a council member of the organization to which the doctor belongs to and their lawyer.
Marie-Michèle Calvez's family tries to advance the investigation by promising a reward of 300,000 francs, or about $55,000, to whoever gives a testimony that identifies the killer. Is this kind of initiative regulated by law?
This initiative isn't commonplace in criminal cases at all, but a party can certainly decide to undertake it. Simply, nothing in the Code of Criminal Procedure prohibits it, but nothing provides for it either.
The police continue their investigation by focusing their inquiries locally, because it was in Guilvinec that Marie-Michèle Calvez's burning car was found. This municipality is also where the victim worked.
As she worked in Guilvinec, for me it wasn't surprising, in quotes, that she was found in Guilvinec. I thought maybe it was connected to her job.
The police probed the victim's professional life. Marie-Michèle Calvez's clients were mainly fishermen.
She drew up life insurance contracts with fishermen at a time when fishing was a substantial activity in the region, and the insurance sector was also in full swing.
Who were her clients? What was Marie-Michèle's relationship with the sea fishermen? The investigators try to answer these questions, but they soon realize that it's going to be very difficult to obtain testimonies.
It's a very unique environment. First, it's a fairly closed environment that exists in a kind of microcosm. It's an environment where people don't talk much to others, where an outsider, someone who doesn't come from the environment, will struggle to find their place. They're viewed with suspicion.
When I say people close the door or the shutters on us, it's the truth. Other investigators, even officers from the Guilvinec police force, will confirm this to you. We had already been told that it wasn't necessarily easy to work in Guilvinec, since people were not very talkative.
The investigation doesn't turn up any conflicts the victim may have had with any of her clients. The police then focus on Marie-Michèle Calvez's colleagues.
She was responsible for the entire sector, and she coordinated a dozen portfolios. So, certainly, she had a very important job. And she was a single, independent woman. So I think that must have aroused jealousy.
At the UAP, she was responsible for coordinating a team of insurance advisors, most of them men.
I think her male colleagues couldn't stand being led by a woman. There was apparently one particular colleague who caused her problems. There was a disagreement between the two of them. She had the impression that this colleague couldn't stand being led by a woman.
Michelle, the victim's partner, tells the investigators that this colleague worried Marie-Michèle. She even thought he had put a contract on her life. The man is brought into the police station. Before the investigators, he denies any involvement in the murder. Above all, he manages to justify his whereabouts. On the night of the tragedy, his partner corroborates his alibi. The colleague is therefore released and in the clear. Going forward, the police take an interest in another lead.
There was fierce competition in the sea fisherman life insurance market. For insurance companies, there was a lot of money to be made, policies to collect.
Marie-Michèle and her team had been ranked in first place nationally by the UAP shortly before. At the UAP, their offer attracted sea fishermen in terms of compensation. It had an offer that was excellent.
Over the course of the investigation, the police find out that Marie-Michèle Calvez's team's commercial success didn't go down well with everyone. The victim's main competitor, until then the leader in the Bigoudin area, was declining. So for a few months, cold calling had given rise to a merciless rivalry. This rivalry between the different insurance companies is taken very seriously by the investigators.
Jealousy can exacerbate personality disorders in some people who wouldn't have hurt a fly if they hadn't been jealous. These are things that we see professionally in criminology, which can lead some people to kill or get killed when they would never have done so in another context.
Could Marie-Michèle's professional success really be what led to her murder? The police then collect a new testimony from one of Marie-Michèle Calvez's clients, who reveals that he spoke on the phone with the victim the night of the murder. He specifies that it was just after 7 p.m.
We know that at 7:15 p.m. she was alive, since she called a client about an insurance matter with a competitor.
This client states that he had just broken his contract with his previous insurer to sign with Marie-Michèle. His former advisor had taken this change very badly. He had even gone to his client's house to steal the new contract signed with the UAP.
Members of Marie-Michèle's competitors were questioned and taken into custody. And we didn't go easy on them to establish their whereabouts.
But once again, nothing connects any of these people to the murder.
All the files that raised concerns on both sides were identified. Nothing pointed to a war or what could have justified such an act.
However, for the police, the investigations into the professional lead are not in vain. They provided important information for the case. At 7:15 p.m., Marie-Michèle Calvez had not yet returned home. The client she spoke to on the phone at that time adds that he's certain the victim called from a public phone booth.
This call couldn't be traced, since back then, everything wasn't recorded by the telecommunications company.
Phone calls that were less than 3 minutes long couldn't be traced, as I recall. Today it seems funny, but that's the way it was.
The investigation goes on without any leads to solve the case. The police are still convinced that Marie-Michèle Calvez knew her killer. They decide to look into her personal relationships again. Very soon, a childhood friend catches their attention. This man is called Max. Among Marie-Michèle Calvez's social circle, he has a very special place. The friendship between Max and the victim was based on their childhood trauma.
I think they bonded because Marie-Michèle lost her mom when she was young. Max lost his mom when he was young too. They lived across the street from each other, so they saw each other very often. And so I think the bond came from there.
He is nice, funny, and friendly. I remember he used to go fishing with my dad. He's nice, yes.
Max and Marie-Michèle grew up, but always had a soft spot for each other. At 33, the man from Brittany is proud of his success.
He's a young sailor and has been to all the naval schools. First the Navy. He did operational training at sea with the Navy.
But the man is still marked by his painful family history.
This young man is under the control of a particularly authoritarian father, also a naval officer. He's never managed to free himself from his authoritarian father's control.
At the time of the murder, the two friends had gotten closer again.
It should be noted that Max lived in a house at the end of the street. Marie-Michèle's house was at the other end of the street, and right in front of Marie-Michèle's house was Max's family home.
Max has been living alone since his divorce.
He and Marie saw each other a lot because they lived on the same street, and they became friendly with each other again. He was a good friend of hers.
But it seems that Max harbored other feelings for his childhood friend.
Marie-Michèle told me that Max was in love with her, but she said, "You know, Max and I aren't like that. He's like a brother to me. We've known each other since we were children." No, she would never have been with him.
The sailor openly disapproved of Marie-Michèle's romantic relationship.
Marie-Michèle told me that when it came to her relationship with Michel, Max was very jealous. He didn't want her to be with Michel. I think he could have wanted to break up their relationship.
The police remember questioning Max the day after the murder, just like all the victims' neighbors.
He was seen by a team of investigators who were going door to door and asking if anyone had heard or seen anything unusual. The usual investigation and the usual questions.
But strangely enough, at the time, Max didn't mention his friendship with Marie-Michèle Calvez.
When they went to his house, they didn't know that the owner of the car was a childhood friend. They didn't know that. They went to see him. He responded, "Really? Really?" He was told there was a burned body in a car. Well, I can't tell you anything. Period. I don't know what exactly he said to them, but he wasn't surprised. He didn't show surprise. Really? Was my friend inside or something? He didn't ask the police any questions.
Max was questioned a second time almost a month after the murder. At the time, he was in hospital following a work accident.
And there he confirmed what he had already told the police a few days before, that he didn't see Marie-Michèle.
He tells police officers that on the day of the murder, he worked all day at Île Longue, the military submarine base in Brest. Then he went home in the late afternoon.
We found out he mowed the lawn opposite Marie-Michèle's house that evening.
Max states that he didn't notice anything unusual while gardening opposite the victim's house. He adds that after mowing the lawn, he returned to his house at around 7:30 p.m. to watch TV while drinking a few beers. At that time, he could have crossed paths with Marie-Michèle, but he claims not to have seen her. More than a year after the murder, the police decide to concentrate on him again.
They come back to him because the examining magistrate decides to start all over again. And finally, they realize Max was questioned too hastily the first time. And there are disturbing things about him. There are disturbing things about his life path.
We find out he isn't a gentle guy. And we find out he was violent towards his ex-wife, even very violent. He's a drinker, and he's impulsive. So we work from there.
He's described as short-tempered. Yes. He's a tough guy.
He's pretty aggressive when he's been drinking. I found out later he's also violent. I found out about that from his ex-wife. Yes, he's capable of strong violence.
Then the investigators learn an important piece of information. Max allegedly had an accident a few days after the murder of Marie-Michèle Calvez.
Max fell out a window from the second floor of his house. But some people are saying he didn't fall. He was with friends, but in fact he jumped. He had been drinking, and he jumped out the window onto the sidewalk, and so that intrigues us.
This is how the police learn why Max didn't attend Marie-Michèle Calvez's funeral.
I wondered if he wanted to avoid going to the funeral because he would have had to carry the body. I thought maybe he can't bear the thought of going to the funeral. And I wondered, why can't he bear the thought of going to the funeral?
Armed with this evidence, the police show up at Max's home on May 21st, 1996 at 7 a.m. He is immediately informed that he's being taken into custody. Jean-Marc, the police took Max into custody 20 months after the murder of Marie-Michèle Calvez. 20 months seems like a very long time. Can you explain why this custody came so late?
As we've seen, the examining magistrate in charge of this case has taken the time to carefully reread the entire file. It's always interesting when an examining magistrate fully plays their role as head of the investigation. Because to remind you, when a legal investigation is opened, the real head of the investigation is the examining magistrate. It's up to them to give momentum to the investigation, to give it a sense of direction, and to ask the investigators to carry out certain investigative measures through letters rogatory. And here, while rereading the case file, the magistrate realized that the investigation into Max was a little superficial and flimsy, so he asked for additional measures, and that's when the police became aware of Max's complex personality.
Max had an accident a few days after the murder and couldn't make it to Marie-Michèle Calvez's funeral. Do you, like the police, find this behavior suspicious?
It's always of interest for investigators to see who comes or doesn't come to the funeral of a homicide victim. In general, their relatives and childhood friends are there. And in this case, Max was absent. He had an accident. One might think that this accident was deliberate to find an excuse not to go to the funeral. But as far as I'm concerned, I'll avoid interpreting this act at the risk of overinterpreting it.
In your opinion, what evidence justifies taking Max into custody?
Well, first, it's very strange that he didn't tell the investigators that he saw Marie-Michèle returning home while he was mowing his father's lawn at the house opposite. What's more, the investigation found that Max had been in love with Marie-Michèle Calvez for a long time, and he couldn't bear her relationship with the doctor. Now, you know as well as I do that romantic disappointment, betrayal, and jealousy are recurring motives for homicide, so this obviously warrants a closer look at Max's whereabouts.
And what do you think of the fact that he didn't say when the police were going door to door that he knew the victim well?
Well, as strange as it may seem, it's quite possible that during this first neighborhood survey, the investigators did not ask him about his connection to the victim. Some people only answer the questions they are asked without going any further. And I know from experience that it's not necessarily because they're hiding something.
After informing him of his arrest, the police decide to take Max to the Camper Investigation Unit. Meanwhile, a team searches his home, but no substantial evidence is found. The news of Max's arrest begins to spread in Guilvinec.
I wasn't shocked because it was a possibility. What's more, Max is someone who can be violent, very violent. So why not? And if he also had a problem accepting Marie's relationship with Michel and had feelings for Marie, it's possible. No, it didn't surprise me.
On May 21st, 1996 at 9:30 a.m., Max's interrogation begins. The suspect seems particularly calm. Michel Alice clearly recalls his disconcerting attitude.
He wasn't prepared to give us a testimony. He was prepared to confront us. This guy had time. He might have been advised. I don't know. I can't judge on that. But he was expecting us. He was eager to confront us, to confront police custody. That was the feeling as an investigator. And among the investigators, I wasn't the only one who thought so.
First question, where were you in the late afternoon on the day of the murder?
He confirms that he mowed the lawn. He spent a lot of time mowing. He can't tell us the exact time.
Very quickly, Max goes back on his first statements.
At one point, he tells us, in the first interrogation, that he saw Marie-Michèle that evening.
His memories are confused, but he admits to going to the victim's house to borrow a gardening tool.
So he was on Marie-Michèle's property. He was by the garage door, and he saw and talked to Marie-Michèle.
He reveals that he then invited her to have a drink at his place, but Marie-Michèle Calvez refused the invitation, explaining that she had an appointment at a painter's house with her partner. Until now, the suspect has always denied seeing the victim the night of the murder.
He's floundering. He's floundering. He doesn't confess to the murder in so many words, but he makes surprising statements to the police that make him a prime suspect.
The police feel they're getting closer to the truth, because with this new statement, this neighbor, the victim's friend, becomes the last person to have seen Marie-Michèle Calvez alive.
It's on record. It's a big paragraph, so it's clear. He was the last to see Marie-Michèle and at her house.
In the evening, the police decide to pause the interrogation. They give Max a few hours of rest. At 9 o'clock the next morning, the suspect returns to face the investigators. Max then gives a different account of his encounter with the victim.
He goes back on his testimony and says, I saw her a while I was mowing the lawn. Opposite my house, I saw Marie-Michèle arrive. She parked her car, and we even exchanged a few words. They exchanged a few words. In particular, they talked about an insurance policy he had bought, and Marie-Michèle told him, yes, you'll have to come by, or I'll have to come by for you to pay, for you to write me the check. There's a little story, but he says, we talked. I was in the garden, and she was on the sidewalk. It didn't last long. It lasted 3 minutes or 5 minutes, I'm not sure.
Max's attitude is completely different from the day before. He's nervous and uneasy.
Then he starts feeling dizzy. He starts feeling dizzy, he has a fit.
I remember the moment when he became unwell very clearly, because I was by the door of my office. Max was at the door, and I was holding Max's right arm, and the investigator from Rennes was holding his left arm. And I said to Max, come on, don't bullshit us. And he responded, I didn't want to. I didn't want to. I didn't want to.
Suddenly, Max collapses.
Which leads us to suspend the police custody. According to medical advice, he's removed from custody and hospitalized.
Max is immediately taken to Comper Hospital. That's when the police make a strange discovery in his cell.
We find a small document which mirrors what was said during the interrogation. It's a reminder that was written during police custody, in the course of his custody. It's a kind of reminder not to stray from his first statement.
So the investigators wonder, why did Max need a written reminder of his whereabouts on the day of the murder? Negar, we just saw how the custody of Marie-Michèle Calvez's best friend was suddenly interrupted for medical reasons. In concrete terms, how does that happen? And is there a particular procedure in this case?
From the beginning of police custody, investigators must inform the person being held of a series of rights, among which is the right to be examined by a doctor to check if their state of health is compatible with police custody. Specifically, the doctor will check if a person being held in custody is, for example, psychologically fragile, or addicted to alcohol or medication, or even narcotic drugs, which could stand in the way of police custody. If their condition is considered compatible, then custody continues. On the other hand, if their condition is considered to be incompatible, custody comes to an end, in principle momentarily while they're hospitalized. And that's exactly what happened. Max's police custody was suspended following his fainting fit and after the doctor recommended taking him to the emergency room.
Surprisingly, the police found a piece of paper in Max's cell, on which he had recorded the various answers he had given during his custody. How come he had a paper and pencil in his cell?
Unlike people who are convicted or even temporarily detained for whom there are regulations that prohibit the possession of certain goods or apparel, the regulations for people being held in custody don't say much, just that they should have any object removed that could be dangerous for themselves or for others. So it's all a matter of circumstances, and that's probably why Max so easily had something to write with in his cell.
We heard the police officer who was present during the custody recalling how Max, before passing out, clearly said twice, "I didn't want to." Negar, can this sentence be considered a confession?
It's very tempting to consider this sentence as a confession. Simply, it may be too broad and too ambiguous. We can't know for sure what he was talking about, especially when we know the circumstances in which he said it, when he was unwell. And above all, we can't even be certain that the investigators, from a strictly formal point of view, have the right to take this into account.
After his fainting fit, Max was taken to the emergency room at Quimper Hospital. The doctors diagnosed an epileptic seizure and decided to hospitalize him. For their part, the police are eagerly waiting to resume interrogations. Max's custody resumed 6 days later, on May 28, 1996, at 11 a.m.
When the questioning restarted, he went back to the position that, on that evening, he hadn't seen Marie-Michèle.
Max says he was mistaken in his previous statements. He's certain of it now. It wasn't on September 21st that he bumped into Marie-Michèle, but 2 days earlier, on September 19th, 1994. According to him, the stress and fatigue of police custody caused him to make these mistakes. For the investigators, all these twists and turns seem suspicious.
Testimonies changing during custody aren't that surprising. What's disturbing is when testimonies change, and by changing, you realize there are things that create such confusion that they can cast suspicion on someone, which is the case with Max.
Time is running out for the police. They have less than 24 hours left of custody, but Max won't change his story.
He says no. That evening, I did mow the lawn, but I didn't see Marie-Michèle or her car.
Given the urgency of the situation, the police decide to alert the examining magistrate.
After informing the magistrates, they say, "This is a situation, we're ending the custody."
Michelle Alice is then in charge of accompanying Max back home.
I take him back in a service vehicle to his house. And on the way, I pass by Marie-Michèle's house.
The officer tries one last time to get the suspect to speak.
I ask him a question in the car. He's in the back, I'm alone in the front. Where was Marie-Michèle's car?
Against all odds, Max then admits to seeing the victim's vehicle on the night of the crime.
And so, he describes the position of Marie-Michèle's car.
The officer's car then stops in front of Max's house.
He doesn't get out. And I say, "Aren't you getting out?" He doesn't believe it. He thinks I'm going to take him to the judge or to jail. He doesn't dare get out of the car. He doesn't believe it.
Disturbed by the sailor's behavior, Michelle Alice then returns to the police station to report this latest conversation with the suspect.
At the time, no procedure was in place to record that moment, since the magistrate had judged that we were outside police custody, that police custody was over, and we shouldn't record it. So we obeyed him on the situation regarding Max.
Max has never been implicated for the murder of Marie-Michèle Calvez.
We mustn't forget that even when someone is in police custody, when they're a likely suspect, they are still presumed innocent. They aren't presumed guilty. When someone is presumed innocent, it isn't up to them to prove their innocence. It's up to those who suspect them, the investigators and the justice system, to prove, with supporting evidence, their guilt.
There are no charges against this man today.
It can't have been Max. He's a childhood friend. Why would he do that?
Jean-Marc, we've just heard the investigator tell us about the last moments he spent with Max in the car. Do you find it normal that this conversation was not included in the legal proceedings?
Rightly, the magistrate considers that Max is no longer in police custody. But in my opinion, nothing prevented this investigator from drawing up a detailed report, included with the proceedings, recounting Max's words and behavior.
And what do you think of the content of the conversation and the attitude Max had at that moment?
As for the content, he repeated that he saw the victim's car parked on the street that evening, but he remembered precisely where it was parked. Then, as for his behavior, we get the impression that he was reliving and reconstructing that moment. If he didn't get out of the car, it was because he was under the impression that he was going to be taken to jail.
Do you think that a transcript of this conversation could have justified indicting Max?
That's a decision for the examining magistrate to make, and he considered at the time that there was not enough serious or corroborative evidence to indict him or inculpate him, as they said back then. So Max went free. To remind you, in this case, he has never been officially prosecuted, so he's just a witness.
The investigation into the murder of Marie-Michèle Calvez continues. Years go by, but the investigation doesn't get to the truth. Almost 4 years after the murder, the police decide to return to the victim's house because they regret not having searched the basement of the property. On June 7, 1998, the victim's basement is thoroughly searched. The discovery of a pile of fabric immediately seems of interest.
I was with 2 officers in the basement of the house. In the basement, I said to them, "Look over here, there's linen." There were piles of tea towels and sheets. Everything that was found in the car could come from there.
The pieces of fabric look just like the ones found burned in the victim's car.
The pieces of fabric found in the fire were determined to have come from Marie-Michèle's garage.
Wooden chocks are also discovered in the basement.
There were thick rectangular chocks, which were used to stop car wheels from moving in case the handbrake released or something. There were several, at least 3 or 4 like that, I think, in the basement.
The piece of wood that was found in the fire was identical. The residues were identical to the wheel chock that is still in the basement.
It therefore seems that the killer used objects from the victim's basement to set fire to the car.
There were also jerry cans of gasoline in the basement for the lawnmowers. There was everything you needed in the basement to set the car on fire, that's for sure.
4 years after the murder of Marie-Michèle Calvez, investigations suggest that the victim was killed at home.
There's no explanation. The investigation was botched.
The murder scenario is confirmed. The investigation has been able to establish Marie-Michèle Calvez's final moments.
It happened quickly. She may have had a surprise visit.
I think the murderer was close to Marie-Michèle. Marie-Michèle would never have let someone into her home that she didn't know. So it must have been someone that she knew very well.
For the head of investigation, it probably wasn't first-degree murder.
A blow, I think. A blow, a fall. I think it was originally an accident, quite simply.
It's impossible to know exactly what happened in the house. One thing is certain, around midnight, Marie-Michèle Calvez's car was no longer in front of her home. The investigators know this thanks to the testimony of a neighbor who that evening was walking around the neighborhood.
So we can imagine that someone snuck Marie-Michèle's car into the basement. Easily done. It was equipped with an access gate. The car was hidden until midnight, when another vehicle was seen in front of Marie-Michèle's house. Probably the second vehicle in the case.
The perpetrator would therefore have waited several hours before moving the car and the victim's body, helped by an accomplice.
In the end, relatively frequently, the killer calls their spouse, a family member, or their best friend, and they make a pact. It's someone they know and have a bond with. Taking part in this creates another bond of life and death, you could say.
In the middle of the night, the two cars would then have gone to Guilvinec. Arriving at the scene, the perpetrators would have set the vehicle on fire, using objects collected from Marie-Michèle Calvez's basement.
This kind of modus operandi, setting fire to a car to make a body disappear, in criminology, is mainly seen with men.
A little over 5 years after the incident, in January 2000, the investigators returned to search the victim's home. 8 cigarette butts are collected from the basement, but no DNA can be extracted from this evidence.
I didn't understand why these cigarette butts weren't collected right away. That seemed odd to me, too.
On the same day, upstairs in a closet in the bathroom, a blood-stained paper tissue is discovered. Tests are able to isolate a male DNA profile, but the person it belongs to has not yet been identified.
We have to check with the prosecutor's office and the examining magistrate with a list of everything that's left. What was analyzed using the techniques of the time? What's left? What can still be analyzed? What can we collect today? Techniques have evolved so much.
Jean-Marc, what's very surprising about this investigation is the time it took to carry out new searches. 4 years after the incident for one, 5 years for the other. Under these conditions, can we reasonably hope to find evidence?
What you need to know is that this house has not been sealed off for a long time. It's impossible over such a long period to identify all the people who may have entered it. For example, I know that following water damage, workers painted and carried out plumbing repairs.
In fact, Jean-Marc, this house was not considered a crime scene until 4 years after the murder, when tea towels and wooden chocks were discovered in the basement, identical to those used to set fire to the car.
Yes, it's a shame. If from the first search the basement of this house had been thoroughly inspected, the property would have been cordoned off and the investigation would have undoubtedly unfolded differently.
In 2000, during the last search, 8 cigarette butts were collected, but no complete DNA could be extracted. Do you think it would be wise today to carry out new forensic tests?
It's true that given the evolution of techniques, we could probably extract DNA from them, and it's a safe bet that we would find DNA from people close to the victim. But what would that prove? Marie-Michèle smoked, and she used to smoke with her friends.
Considering the information available to us, can we get an idea of the sequence of events in the crime?
The evidence collected during the investigation means we can come up with a possible scenario involving the transportation of the body from the house to the place it was burned. However, this doesn't allow us to answer the fundamental questions. Who, how, why? In other words, who committed this murder? How was this woman killed, and why was she killed? What is the motive for this murder?
An essential aspect in this case is collusion. Do you think that time is working in the investigators' favor, and that there's a chance that one day the pact of silence between the perpetrator and the accomplice will be broken?
That depends on the bond that exists between the perpetrator and the accomplice. But to find out, to understand this bond, the investigation must continue. It can't remain inactive. If the investigation, so far, has been unable to identify and incriminate the main perpetrator, there is another possible line of attack, looking for the accomplice. And to look for them, it's necessary to go back through the people who appear in the case file.
Marie-Michèle is still remembered. People still talk about her. We still think about her. She isn't really gone in a way because we haven't forgotten her and we won't forget. The person who murdered Marie-Michèle has been keeping the secret for 25 years. It must be a heavy burden to carry. It must make everyday life difficult, too.
I think about it every day. There isn't a day when I don't think about it. Did she realize? Was she scared? Was she in pain? Who did she think about? I'll never know. There are questions I've been asking myself for 25 years. Who? Why? I want answers. I won't give up. I won't give up. I'm sure there are people who know something. It's not possible. I can't imagine going on living like this. It's not possible. I can't. If I lose hope, it's not worth it. I can't live. Come forward. Speak. Say what you know. It's never too late to come forward and speak up for Marie's memory.
It's extremely unusual, but the investigation into the murder of Marie-Michèle Calvez has been open for 25 years. 25 long years of work by the Rennes Criminal Investigation Unit. 25 long years of waiting and suffering for the victims' loved ones, who hope one day the truth will come out.